Hello, it's Samantha with Ballet Austin. Today I'm going to walk you through a scone recipe I found on New York Times Cooking. While I've been home, I've enjoyed getting my hands a little dirty with bread baking, scone baking. So this is one I recently found that I think is pretty fun, easily done with a little one as a helper. So let's go ahead and get started. Starting with the dough, you will whisk together your sugar, flour, and baking powder. Once you've got that nice and mixed together, you'll add cubed cold butter and press the flour into the butter until it becomes like a pebble type of form. We'll check back in once I've gotten that all together. Once the flour, sugar, baking powder, and butter are all combined, it's going to look more like a coarse sand than pebbles, like I mentioned before. Make a small well in the center, add your vanilla, spill it a little bit trying to set up my half cup of heavy cream. We're going to take that and pour that in the middle, just like so. Get my hands dirty once again and combine all of that. In just a moment, you'll see what the end result looks like. Now that you've worked the heavy cream vanilla into your dry goods, you want it to look a little bit like this. For your workstation, you want to make sure there's a nice fine little bit of flour. If the dough gets a little too sticky, add a little bit more flour. I like to keep just a little bit of extra flour readily handy? I don't know, one of the two. And then if it gets a little too dry, kind of falling apart, you're going to add a little bit more heavy whipping cream into that dough. So let's see if I can turn this thing out while on camera, so just bear with me here. We're just going to turn that upside down, like so. Not the best I've ever done. I obviously don't have a stand, but I'm going to work this into about a 5 by 14 inch rectangle, and then we're going to laminate it. But let me get that going, and we'll check back in just a few moments. All right, now that I've got somewhat of a rectangular shape, I'm going to fold this third over the middle and do the same thing on this side so I get a little bit of a lamination in my dough. Once I've done that, I press it all the way back out into a similar shape such as this. Then we'll be adding the good stuff, the cinnamon and butter and powder, or yeah, something like that. We'll get there. So before I press it back out into my rectangle, I want to make sure that you see this. So I have my 3 little layers. You can kind of see on that side of the dough, but you want to make sure when you're facing it again, you have one of the folds in front of you. I refloured my surface just because it was starting to get a little wet and I didn't want it to break apart. So now I'll press it back out into that rectangular shape, and we'll add all the good stuff for the inside. Now that you have your dough pressed back out into a rectangle, I want to mention that you want to make sure it's fairly thin. Once you roll it into the cinnamon roll shape, you want it to be kind of thin. It doesn't quite work quite right if it's a little too thick. So our insides, we have melted butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon, of course. Can't believe I forgot that. Give those a nice little mix. Whisk those together, and we're going to spread it right on top of our dough. You don't want to chill the dough too much, or at this stage. It gets a little too hard. You really want to make sure it sets in the swirl for when it bakes. Once the brown sugar, cinnamon, and butter concoction is all whisked together, spread it over your dough, and we're going to cut it into 4 equal to semi-equal strips and wrap them around each other and place them on your pan. I didn't have parchment paper, so we're going with aluminum foil and some cooking spray, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a little bit. So your end result will look a little something like this. Don't get too frustrated if it breaks apart like mine did. Definitely need some help after that first little strip is rolled up. I prefer to let it chill overnight, so you will see me tomorrow morning snacking on this with my morning coffee. The recipe says up to 30 minutes or at least 30 minutes, but I think that the colder the dough can get and that butter can get, it'll turn out a little bit better. See you in the morning. Good morning. So I've already preheated my oven to 350 degrees. You want to take your scones out of the fridge and slice them into 8 pieces, or 8 wedges rather. I'll get a shot of that as we put those in the oven. They're going to bake for 20 to 24 minutes. You want to make sure you rotate them about halfway through that baking time. So let's go ahead and put those in the oven in just a second. All right, so you can just barely see the cut marks I've made in my dough. As I mentioned, we're at 350 degrees. Let me open this up. Place those right into the oven. I'm going to put them in this way. There we go. Easy to rotate. We'll be back in 10 minutes. So I just rotated it. We're about halfway there. Now we're going to be looking for a nice golden brown dough. We are on the home stretch. The scones are out of the oven. Mine fell apart. I think I still have some perfecting to do with this recipe. But we're going to let this rest for about 30 minutes and you'll see me for one more time with my coffee and scones. Well, there you have it. I've got my scone and coffee. Now it's off to work.